Hi everyone, my name's John. I work for a company called Telerik. We develop UI controls and a whole bunch of other services tools for developers. You can find out more about us at telerik.com. And we've been doing software development for over 10 years. We got millions of customers, and hopefully you're one of ours. And if you're not, you will be soon. So that's my hope. I'm going to be talking to you in this session about a whole range of different tools and stuff that's kind of coming, forward in the industry. We're going to talk about package managers. We're going to talk about frameworks. We're going to talk about all sorts of different things. So there's really no structure for this session. It's kind of going to be all over the map. That's usually how my sessions go anyway. So buckle in and hold on tight. There's no flight plan, is what I'm saying. All right, so let's start with package managers. I know that you guys probably use NuGet for developing your .NET applications. NuGet is in the world of package management, is a relatively new kid on the block, despite the fact that it's been around for quite a while. And I say that because package managers have been around for a while. There are some newer package managers in the web dev space. There are also task managers as well that you can utilize as part of your build process, which I'll show. But what's interesting about this is that some of these are actually now starting to creep back into the Microsoft camp. So in particular, we'll take a look at one called Bower, which is actually now supported within Visual Studio. It's also supported inside what's called the Telerik platform, but that's an aside. But NuGet and other packages are basically a way of safely and sanely utilizing open source so that you're basically not breaking your own code. So the idea with NuGet and other things is that you can pull down dependencies and their dependencies, etc., and be able to work against that open source or client project in a way that can be updated after the fact, as well as maintained quite nicely. Incidentally, there's a number of NuGet packages that you guys are probably using already, yeah, I'll show you some other ways, excuse me, of using these things. Just as an aside, it also applies to applications as well. So on the Windows side, there's a framework called, or a project called Chocolatey. There's one also called OneGet, which you guys may have heard of. These are ways of getting applications onto Windows. There's like AppGet on Unix-based systems as well. So package managers have been all over the place. So they've been around and they'll continue to be around for a while. What we're going to take a look at is one called Bower. So if you go to bower.io, this is a package manager for building web applications, and it's run via the command line, but it also integrates through other IDEs. So it will integrate with pretty much any IDE you got, including Visual Studio, which is great. But most cases, you're going to utilize Bower from the command line. The way it gets set up is through NPM, and if you don't know what NPM is, that's fine. NPM is Node Package Manager, so when you install Node, it ships alongside it this package manager called NPM. And so on the command line, you use NPM to download packages, and NPM is used quite a bit for building out applications as well. It's also, Node is also a runtime environment, so it's based on the V8 engine of Chrome and allows you to write server apps, allows you to write client-side applications as well. And to be able to pull down packages from that via NPM turns out to be really useful. So one of those packages is obviously Bower. And so if you walk through the docs of this, it just talks about how to go ahead and install this. It's very simple. So you'll say npm install /g Bower. The /g, or sorry, -g is basically for global. So you have local and global scope in npm for packages. And if I go ahead and install it, it will go ahead and, I need to do sudo access for this, which is fine. But if you go ahead and install this, it will go ahead and lay it down on disk and then give you access to basically Bower in terms of that. So it pulls down all these dependencies. It has all these other sub packages that it uses as well to utilize it. These are all 304s because they're all cached, basically. I've done this before. And it sets up a symlink here for Bower, and then you can start utilizing Bower on the command line. So if I say Bower, let me do this. Yeah, so you go, these are some of the commands you can execute through Bower. So you can do what's called a Bower init, which is where you're wanting to set up a package for yourself. You're wanting to create a package that you want to distribute to other people. But most times people will say Bower and then install. So that's where you're wanting to go ahead and install packages. Just so you're aware, when you do a bower init, which is this guy here, it does create what's called this bower.json file. I'll show you some examples of kind of what this looks like. I've got a project here that I've been working on for a while. It's called, what is it called? It's called Fire Chat, or Kendo Chat. It's a chat application I built for mobile using Kendo UI and a whole bunch of other things. And if you go ahead and do a bower list, what this does is it actually looks at the list of project dependencies in that bower.json file and then shows you what dependencies you have for your project. So here I'm using project dependencies for my project here are include Font Awesome, Everlive, which is Telerik backend services, other things like Kendo UI. That's a bower package we have available as well. So this is when I'm using an application, like, so for example, I go to a list of my files here. We take a look at the bower.json file here. This is the description of it. So it's basically a JSON description. And what it does is it just says, look, these are the packages I'm going to use. It's very similar to NuGet, where you have a NuGet file, a package file, and then you just basically say, these are the dependencies I have. Except in this case, we're utilizing it for, obviously, web applications. So these are like JS libs that I'm using. Notice the notation here for my dependencies. So dependencies are used, this notation where I can say, I must use a version either greater than or equal to such, or I can say, as a minimum, I require this dependency, or I must have this version for my dependencies. So those are sort of the kind of things that you can set up and utilize for. If I choose to, I can go ahead and if this was say a library I was developing, I could use this bower.json file as my package description and then upload it to a Bower repository for other people to use. And that's how these packages get installed. So the way I can do this is say Bower install and then install something. So if I wanted to, I could say install jQuery, for example. But the reality is I'm using Kendo UI, so the dependencies on Kendo UI include jQuery, so I already have it listed. So if I were to go through here, I could take a look at the components, which is typically where they're actually installed. So if I take a look at the components, these are all the stuff that's been pulled down. And notice that when I pull down Kendo UI, it also pulled down jQuery because it's listed as a dependency. So that's the first thing, is just installing Bower is pretty simple. Just npm install. npm comes with Node, and that's how you get started. Installing packages is really simple. Just say Bower install and then the name of the package. This is very synonymous with NuGet that you guys use in Visual Studio. So if I wanted to install, say, jQuery, I say Bower install jQuery. If I want to install other ones, I can as well. I can also install against Git endpoints. So if I'm installing against Git provider, I go ahead and use that. It doesn't have to be GitHub, it could be something else. And then I can install against URLs as well if I wanted to include as a particular file. I can search against packages. The way in which you can do it on the web is obviously going to bower.io/search, and you can take a look at the different packages that are there. So they include things like Bootstrap, D3, Angular, HTML5 boilerplate, Font Awesome, etc., etc. Have you guys seen HTML5 boilerplate? I'll show you. HTML5 boilerplate is basically a starting point for building HTML5 based applications, websites, etc. It includes a whole bunch of it's like a bootstrapper into building an application. It stubs out a bunch of, well, it doesn't stub out a bunch of files, but it gives you a bunch of files that you can start working from, including things like references to jQuery, Modernizer. It allows you to utilize frameworks like Normalize. It does a whole bunch of things. You can also generate a custom build. It includes an Ant script if you're kind of into that. You can go ahead and change the look and feel of all this stuff. So it turns out to be pretty useful. So that's one sort of thing that you can use as part of that. The boilerplate itself doesn't look like much when you look at it, but it's got some good starting points when you're building out an application. And then, incidentally, that's actually supported through Visual Studio as well. So there's an extension you can use for that. There's all kinds of other ones as well. So these are some of the ones you'd use. So the way that you'll do this is you'll just say Bower install, and then let's say Bootstrap. So it's going to go off, and through the power of the internet, going to go off and pull down the repository endpoint. It gets that endpoint from bower.io, so it goes to bower.io, sees, okay, here's the Bower package, this is where it points to in GitHub, pulls it down, and then puts it into my components. It will also go ahead and resolve any dependencies. So right now it's going through jQuery. So it's looking at jQuery, it's like, well, it's listed jQuery as a dependency, and then it's going ahead and said, okay, you'll find those in components. So now if I go ahead and say cd components, you'll see that I have Bootstrap. There's Bootstrap. That's the distribution that's up on GitHub. basically. So this is a way in which a lot of web devs will actually target web development via package management, which is Bower. There are other tools as well that you can use this. Bower is a pretty popular one. It's supported in Visual Studio and other tools as well. Grunt's another interesting sort of thing that you can use. There's also other task managers like Gulp. This is sort of synonymous with MS Build in a sense. It's kind of, or Ant. They are basically task runners. So a task runner is like if I want to execute a build, typically in a compilation process and I want to do other stuff, that's kind of like what a task runner will do. This is all for basically front-end web dev stuff. So Grunt is basically a way in which you can automate a lot of the steps for prepping websites, web apps, things like that. And it contains a whole bunch of tasks that you can use for doing these things. So it includes all kinds of plugins for doing things like modification of source code. You can do cross-compilation. You can generate different tasks and builds, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole host of things that you can do. Another one that's available is called Gulp, which is done a little bit differently. Gulp is sort of a different take on a task manager, a task runner, and how it does it. You'll see different opinions online about Gulp versus Grunt, etc. But it's certainly something you can execute. In the web dev space for Microsoft developers, this is MS Build. So, although you can use these as well if you wish. In fact, I think I remember Grunt being supported in Visual Studio. Let me just Google that. Oh, there you go. So you got NPM, Grunt, Gulp, Bower, etc., all supported in Visual Studio. So you can utilize these ones if you want as well. And the reason why you might use these over, say, MS Build, for example, is because these are going to typically operate against front-end dependencies that will typically leverage these things. So Hanselman's got a great post here that talks a little about what are called tasks. Inside of the Grunt pages I showed you here, where you have tasks defined, so there's tasks are basically like, generate for me a minimum minified file, or generate for me the less markup. These are some of the tasks that you can define as part of a Grunt file. And then you can call these directly off the command line. So inside of Visual Studio, they expose this through, obviously, an interface. And so that's what it's doing here. So NPM is going to be part of this, which is great. That's package management. What's interesting about this is actually when you install this extension, I have not installed this, so let's go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and do this now. So I'll go into Visual Studio. So I told you this would be kind of like all over the map, but just wanted to show you. The question is, why is there seems to be a move to JSON-based configs over XML? And I don't know, it's just the way the industry trend is moving. I think it's because I think XML is a little bit bloated in a sense. Like it's like start tag, end tag, start tag, end tag, start tag, end tag, and like there's any number of tools to understand it. Whereas JSON is a little bit more terse and understandable. Like it's a little bit more readable in that sense. It also aligns well to JavaScript as well. So an object literal is basically a JSON fragment, if you will. So that's how objects are defined. That's why it's called JavaScript object notation. So that's part of it, I guess. And it just maps well to web dev, I guess. Whereas XML is kind of like, XML brings along with it all the baggage of like schema and other stuff like XSLT and stuff, and I think for a lot of people it feels too enterprisey. I don't know. Like that's a total shot in the dark, ignorant. I've just Googled a couple of things and that's what I think, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was starting to think.
Okay, cool. So if you go online, you can do a search for package extension, IntelliSense extension, I think it is. Evidently it's not here, but apparently it's somewhere. So package IntelliSense extension. So this is going to do a search for any dev dependencies and dependencies that you use inside of either Bower or NPM dependencies. So it's going against that repository and saying, hey, this project's going to use Bootstrap, or hey, this project's going to use Angular. It allows you to do those things, which is kind of cool. Oh, it uses a GIF here. So here's a GIF. Shows you hover over it, it gives you a description. That's actually pretty cool. That's actually very cool. So yeah, definitely start using this, guys. I'm not just talking to the people on the video as well. So there you go. So it's going to be there somewhere, so I won't bother boring you with that. So the reason why that's also relevant is because it actually makes it, when they integrate package management like Power and NPM, etc., inside of Visual Studio, it actually becomes a more natural story for web developers outside the Microsoft ecosystem. So if they come into the Microsoft ecosystem, they're like, oh, this is great. I know these tools. I can use them. So that helps there. NPM, as part of Node, which I talked about earlier, includes a whole host of different packages that are available. This is basically any number of packages you'd want to use. A lot of tools are based off of this. Some of these you might be familiar with, like Cordova for building hybrid mobile apps. Gulp I showed you earlier or talked about earlier. Yeoman is a good one. Yeoman or Yo is a way of, it's basically a command line tool that allows you to generate, it's kind of like a project generator. Like when you say file new project in Visual Studio, it generates for you a bunch of files. Yeoman is kind of the same way. It will ask you questions along the way like a wizard. It will say, do you want this, do you want that, versus, I'll show you. Here, let me show you. So you say Yo, that's the name of the, you can generate these your generators yourself. So you say Yo, and then it will say, what do you want to do? And this is the Yeoman generator, and you can install a generator. So we'll search NPM for generators. This is another tool you can use, by the way. And there's all these generators for different types of apps. So if you want to build you can build generators for generators. These are all the Yeoman generators that have been built. Like if I want to build an Angular-based CMS, or I want to build, yeah, there's any number of generators there. Let me just kill that. There's Yeoman. So Yeoman, I'll run the, I don't know, Kenda UI generator. We have one for Kenda UI. Then it's going to ask you a series of questions, just like the project install, sorry, the new project wizard that you see in Visual Studio, or new projects in WebStorm or Eclipse or whatever IDE you're using. It's going to ask you a series of questions. You can turn these on and off by hitting space. This is Yeoman. So I'll include all three. It'll say, do you want me to scaffold out a single page application for you? You say no. It then generates a grunt file. It generates a package file. The grunt file is the task runner. So if you were to take a look at the grunt file, which we can take a look at, let me just go and do all this. So it's going to go and just spit out all those things and generate dependencies. So it goes through, yada, yada, yada. It's pulling down all these dependencies based on that Yeoman generator. Do a list now. So this is what it's stubbed out. And it's done so in, oh no, I think I've done it. Okay, let me do this. I'll cut the grunt file here. So this is the grunt file. These are the list of tasks that I can do for that Kenda UI generator that we built. So there's a bunch of tasks that you can do. So you can say grunt Yeoman, grunt watch. So grunt watch will just run in the background in the console and say if any changes happen to the JS files, automatically trigger a hint, JS hint, which is a tool for JavaScript. So here's the JS hint, and it will just basically tell you if you have any problems in your JavaScript file. So linters and hinters, basically, they're just static analyzers. They just look at a file, they say, this looks good or no, it doesn't. And there's a number of tools for that. So you can say JSLint. You guys have hopefully used this. So these and other tools, these actually integrate with Visual Studio as well. So for folks on the video, I warned you this would go in every different direction, so I'm just showing you why this is the case. There's also JSHint as well, which is another code quality tool for JavaScript. And this also integrates with Visual Studio as well, so you can take a look at that as well. But these ones you can drive plumbing through on the command line. So Yeoman will generate those in the grunt file, which I showed you, and then you can run tasks that will obviously do that. So I can say, grunt, and then you can integrate a tab completion one, which will show you all the tasks. So you update your profile for terminal. You can do this inside of the console for Windows as well. And you just hit tab, it'll do tab completion on all the grunt tasks that are defined there. So I can say JSHint, for example, as part of this push, and then we'll say, oh, you got problems with these files here. So these are all automated sort of tools you can run. You can run them in the background, you can run them all the time. You can watch them for changes, for example. So I can say grunt watch, and all this will do is just watch and wait for changes. So as soon as you touch a JavaScript file, it's going to immediately run JSHint, like, oh, you got a problem, oh, you got a problem. And so it's kind of like a background compilation sort of thing that goes on. Like, incidentally, if you see all those red squigglies in Visual Studio, it's doing the same thing. It's just running a background task against your JS file, or any other file for that nature, and it's just doing a background compilation, and then saying, is there a problem? Yes, okay, update the UI to say a red squiggly, for example. That's all it's doing. This is just more in your face. So that's sort of another tool that you can use for this, and NPM is just one of many tools that you can use. NPM is really, really popular, and I'm actually happy to see it now supported inside of Visual Studio, because that's actually going to get a lot of Visual Studio / Microsoft devs into using the same type of tooling that's used predominantly in the web space. So predominantly, i.e., web space, i.e., not Internet Explorer, but for example, non-Microsoft devs, which is great. We want sharing of tooling because it makes everyone's life easier. So we talked about package management, talked a little bit about task runners, talked about NuGet, talked about NPM, talked about other tooling. Let's go back to my doc here. Let's see what else we can take a look at. Building tips. There's a whole bunch of sort of building tips that I could just rattle on about. There's minification tools, there's crunching tools. A lot of these are actually contained within the build script for the HTML5 boilerplate. Actually, if we take a look at the HTML5 boilerplate, this is actually a good thing to take a look at. So I'm going to download the HTML5 boilerplate, we'll unzip this guy, and we'll take a look at the structure here. So this is the structure of the HTML5 boilerplate. This is actually built into Visual Studio as well as an extension. You can get it. Includes some default files like things like crossdomain.xml for Flash files and cross-domain calls. Browser config, humans.txt, which is like, these are all just meta files for describing like, you know, who built this site and what technologies they use. And you can write a bot that will walk up to this and get us an update for it. But what's interesting about this is it's actually got some really, really good stuff in the, where is it now? Does it include the ent file anymore? Maybe not. It used to. No, it just contains the structure. That's a shame. I thought it included the ent file. Hang on a second. There might be an ent file in a different location. Give me a second here. That's .com. This is the source. That's funny. And like in 4.0, I seem to remember it had a build file. Well, it's got a gulp file, which is kind of half the battle there. So when I come here and I was looking at building tips, there's a bunch of really good ones in the HTML5 boilerplate. And these ones include, let's see here if we can find one. So gulp is basically a JavaScript-based task manager. These are all the tasks that are defined. You don't need to understand it to kind of grok what it's being said here. But if you say gulp space copy, it's going to go ahead and copy these files to a well-known location. But there's other tasks in here that do some interesting things, and I just want to see here. So lint is a perfect example of just going through all of the JS files and running a linter and saying, are there problems with the JS file? That's just one example. Geez, there used to be other ones as well. There used to be like minification tools. There was image crunch files. Those are tasks that are defined also in Grunt. So if you take a look at some of the tasks that you can use in Grunt, Grunt provides a whole host of different plugins that you can use. Let's see here. These are good build tasks to get into the habit of using. I'm just looking at some of these quickly here. So Grunt, image. Let's see. Yeah, so Grunt image is an NPM package, and what it does is it will optimize your image files. And what that means, when you say optimize, it will typically run a basically a compression algorithm against them. Not in the sense of like it will use the appropriate compression and against the file type that you're targeting, like pings or JPEGs or GIFs, for example. It will also strip out metadata, which is a huge no-no if you include metadata in your image file. Excuse me. So if you use a tool like Photoshop, it tends to put like 20K of image metadata into your images. Just bloats them like crazy. You can run a grunt task like grunt image against them, and what it will do is it will do things like this. So it's running image static, and then it says, well, we can take this JPEG from 50K down to 45. So we reduce it by 11%. Or we can take, another good example is test-uppercase ping from 71 to 29 by reducing it. So these are certain things that you can do as part of your automated task process for builds and things like that to try and shrink the size of your applications. The great thing about this is that you can actually automate a lot of this stuff. So you don't have to, you just set it up once and then you're done. But yeah, there's just any number of ways in which you can target this. Just speaking of tools, there's a great tool called IIS Speed that I like a lot. I don't know if you guys have seen this. This is a little bit outside the framework of tooling, but it's kind of a shortcut. It's like the Konami code for performance if you're running IIS. This is basically a HTTP handler. No, not a handler. Sorry, it's an ISAPI filter, I think, that runs. And what it does is it does basically pipeline optimization dynamically. So as requests come in and go out, it will cache resources on the server that are commonly requested. It will convert image files from, say, like ping to WebM. It will minify files dynamically on the fly. It will, get rid of white space. It will do all those sort of things that you can do. And it lists them as optimizations here. So you can see some of the optimizations it will do. And the way it does it is you just install this thing in IIS and it will just magically do it. So it'll do it, and you can just leave all your files untouched. So it will do things like minification. So through what's called a filter, and these are settings you put into a config file, it will do things like convert all GIFs that are outgoing into pings and pings into JPEGs, for example, because it might be smaller. It will lazy load images via deferring loading. So that's sort of a mechanism where you can defer loading of images until all the rest of the content, like JavaScript files and things like that, have been loaded. Although with JavaScript, it's a bit tricky because JavaScript tends to block execution on the page when encountered. You can optimize images, you can outline CSS, you can recompress images, all that sort of stuff. And the way it works is you might think, well, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, wouldn't it like slow down my request cycle? On the initial hit, yes, but it's also governed by a threshold or quota. So the threshold is like half a second. It will say, do as much work as you can for half a second, and then on subsequent requests, just do more work until the point where it's just completely cached, and you're barely even touching anything. Everything's in memory, everything's on the file system, that sort of thing. So it's a cool little tool. There is a whole bunch of, there's another one that's good for pipeline optimization. There are tools that come with Visual Studio. I'm just looking at ASP.NET. There's another one that comes with it. IIS Speed is the one I remember. There was another one called Reduce something for ASP.NET. The name eludes me at this point. It's a similar sort of technology. You install it on the IIS machine, and then it works against reducing your requests, or request reduce. Sorry, not map reduce. Sorry. Why am I looking up map reduce? That is for. So this is another one. This is request reduce. So this makes instantly any ASP. This is a pretty bold claim. Instantly makes any ASP.NET website faster with almost no effort. Okay. So we'll do things like auto spriting. So auto spriting is where you take a whole bunch of different smaller images and you put them into one image, make one request, and then using CSS, and this is an old video game technique, you just create sprites out of that one big file. Minification and bundling, which is, again, trying to reduce your download from many downloads to one download. And so you can see how the waterfall changes from this to this with an installation like those. So these are great little things that you can do. I've been quite impressed by IIS Speed. I've tweeted about it quite a bit. And I've done some testing with some sites that I've done here. So this is an example of fiddler capture. On the left is unoptimized. On the right, it's optimized. And you can see that the number of requests are diminished. You can't see it really, but it's like it does make an impact and a difference in terms of perf, and does a really good job in terms of those things. So I'm a big fan in terms of that. So definitely try and check that out if you can in terms of tooling. What other stuff we got to use? Package management we covered. Errors. Okay, let's talk about this. So how do you guys trace errors and things that go wrong on the server for you guys, or on the application, or even on the client side for that matter? How do you guys capture that stuff? Do you just guys say like, forget it, and then if we can counter it, then so be it? Or do you guys do something else?
I use exception lists
Yeah.
on the server just to catch the errors.
And then where do you put them in? like into a log file or something like that?
Yeah, you have like a repository where everything's stored.
Okay, yeah, that can work. There are a number of analytics tools out there. So if you do a search, like analytics tools are great. Don't think of analytics as like, oh, that's a sales thing, right? Like that's Google Analytics. I'm like, you know, how can I get more customers? This is actually great for developers to track when things go wrong on a site as well. So you can kind of think of this as like a service endpoint for all of your, you typically like log statements that you printf out to a console or something like that, but these things are going to go to a server that aggregates all that content and then tells you when and where things happened. Google Analytics actually does a reasonably good job of tracking all this stuff. Like it will actually, it's actually gotten quite powerful. Like back in the day, Google Analytics was all focused on, you know, A/B, or certain aspects of A/B testing, certain aspects of like, you know, conversion and customer retention and things like that. But recently, Google Analytics has actually got some really powerful capabilities associated with it that you can use for your websites, and they'll track things like errors, and they'll track things like where they occurred and when they occurred. We have a similar product, but it's a little bit different, called Telerik Analytics, and this one's actually interesting because you can capture JavaScript errors, you can also track server errors, but also errors that occur on mobile apps and mobile sites. And so that turns out to be really nice. And when you do that, it will actually generate all kinds of charts and graphs for you and tell you where errors occur. I know that app analytics for Visual Studio, App Insights, excuse me. So App Insights is from Microsoft. This is something that you can take a look at as well. Something that's definitely useful. We provide a similar sort of facility here. This is available through TFS. So definitely something to check out as well. But this is something that I would encourage you strongly to start capturing and integrating. It shouldn't take you a long time to integrate these sorts of things. And the reason why I say that is because oftentimes your service will get used without you knowing. And during those times, they'll be used by different user agents, they'll be used by different people in different locales, and different errors kind of crop up from those times. So definitely take advantage of that if you can. There's some interesting tools that you can actually use as part of this. You can generate what are called JavaScript heat maps to show you where people are using your site. There's some interesting projects of what people have done. So these are sort of when you've cooked out your site and you want to track what people have done. This will show you like where people have actually clicked on your app. There's ones that actually do it based on where you look on the page as well, which is really cool. So it'll capture your face and then track your eyeballs and just, tell you where these things are occurring. There are heat maps associated with this for a number of different things that you can use, which is great. You can also do this for tracking errors. There's any number of analytics solutions out there. There's one called Raygun. These guys are based in New Zealand, and these guys do analytics as well. Twitter has analytics as well. It's a free service from Twitter, I think, but they don't do it as. I don't think their analytics solution is actually all that great, to be honest. But yeah, there's just a number of. I'm not sure. Oh, these are my tweets, but sorry. There's an app analytics aspect of Twitter that they provide. Where is it here? There's a service that they offer. I think it's only for certain types of scenarios as well. There's just so many different things that you can use that. So definitely use analytics if you can. It's definitely worth looking at and tracking some of those things. And you can check out ours as well. It's just as awesome. So, anything else you guys want to look at while we're having a quick discussion here? What's that?
I just went, wow,
Why?
all the stuff.
Oh, there's just Polymer. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. So Polymer is a sort of it's an opinionated project on web components. So this is from Google. And what Polymer is basically trying to get folks to start playing with some of the standards early. So they provide a list of polyfills for things like HTML5 or HTML templates, custom elements, shadow DOM, and other aspects that go into building web components. Web components are basically like trying to get rid of the div soup that you see in a lot of web apps today. So if you look at a canonical web app like Gmail or I don't know, Outlook Online or Excel Online, and you look at the markup for those apps, it's just divs everywhere and IDs and classes, and just it's really hard to kind of point to an element and say, aha, that's the menu bar, or aha, that's the reading pane or whatever. And so what Polymer is basically, as I said, an opinionated implementation, if you will, a framework, whatever you want to call it, on top of Web Components. Web Components is a sort of an initiative being driven by the web community to try and get some sanity around markup, and to basically describe markup in a sense of like components. So self-encapsulated, autonomous to an extent, but certainly encapsulated elements that you can put onto a web page. So rather than having a menu represented as a div, you can have it as a custom element like menu. Like you can create an element called menu and have it self-describing, and there's other things that go into that as well, like styling, like the global impact of style sheets on a web page can really suck sometimes. Like you'll put a style sheet up on a page, and it will cascade, because of that's its nature, down to sub elements and sub aspects of your site that you don't want it to cascade down to. Or even worse, you'll have elements or parts of your page that you built. Like say you've worked really hard on a menu bar, then you put it onto your site, and because of CSS that's been defined on the menu bar, then those things kind of leak out and they start styling other aspects of your page. So by utilizing shadow DOM and encapsulation through web components, those things now become a little bit easier to kind of maintain. So web components is definitely part of that. So Polymer is great. You can check it out. They provide a number of mechanisms. This is an example. This is like the most trivial example you can look at. So if you're using what's called an evergreen browser, you guys ever heard that term? Evergreen stands for, it's not an acronym, it's just basically, it's representation of a browser that is always self-updating. Like Chrome's an evergreen browser. IE 10, 11 is now an evergreen browser. Firefox is an evergreen browser. These are browsers that are constantly kept up to date. So the latest and greatest evergreen browsers don't typically have to have polyfills, but if, let's assume you're using an evergreen browser like Chrome, latest version, you'll import the element, which is one of the 4 elements of web components. So you have HTML imports, custom elements, shadow DOM, and I'm trying to remember the 4th, I can't remember. Anyway, so you do an import. So you'll do an import of an element itself. This is the definition of the custom web element itself, called Google Map. And then you'll just use it inside of your markup. So it's just Google Map, that's it. Web components have a distinct element, which is they are always named as sort of like name and then dash something for name collision and things like that, preventing them as such. But you'll notice here that this is not a standard sort of HTML DOM element. But it's sort of, it kind of reminds you of like directives, right, in Angular, right? So it's kind of that similar sort of idea. Angular is moving towards web components. So this is kind of part of the future that we'll see going forward. It's not an accident that Angular was largely driven by Google, obviously, and now Polymer is being driven by Google. So they're trying to get some sanity around this. So the first element is import, then to use a new element. They talk about some examples here. There's a number of elements you can check out. Mozilla had its sort of pick or take on this. They are trying to obviously get to a similar place as this, but Polymer is definitely interesting in terms of what's possible. If you take a look at the markup for this page, actually, you can take a look at Polymer itself in action. So this is called the scroll area. So this area here is called the scroll area. Let me get rid of this. There you go. So this is the scroll area, and then inside here I have a site banner. Like this is a very readable markup, right? And so inside of the site banner, I have other sub-elements like, for example, an app bar, or a core icon, or a drop-down panel. These are non-standard specific elements, but because they're imported here, which is, where's my link? Though they're imported via, there's a link in here. There we go. So there's some Polymer elements there. That's Polymer, and then these are the elements that are used for this page. So if you're going to take a look at this guy, sorry, take a look at the elements here. I think this is the definition of them. So there's our web components there. They define how these things kind of look and feel. I don't think that's the one I'm looking for, but there you go. Yeah. So long and short of it is that if you look at the markup this, it actually makes it a little bit easier. This is better than div soup that we have today. So site banner, etc. And because these things have what's elements of aspects called what are called shadow DOM, you're going to see these things inside here. So these actually have self-containing styles that don't bleed out. You can have them bleed in and bleed out if you want, but shadow DOM allows you to maintain those styles as well as encapsulate implementation. So the other thing that you can bleed out, unfortunately, is implementation details, because the nature of markup and script is that it's not very well, encapsulated a lot. You can kind of go in and do nasty things, and so Polymer gives you a mechanism of encapsulating those sorts of things. In addition, it utilizes like the double mustache notation for binding of events and data and things like that. It's got a whole host of other capabilities, but really it's trying to give us some sanity over our markup. So it's part of what Polymer is all about. So that's a very high level, very poor definition, I'm sure, according to Google, of Polymer. Anything else you guys want to take a look at?
Do you have any feelings towards material design?
Question is, do I have any feelings towards material design? I actually like material design quite a bit. There's been some interesting articles that have been written about it. Material design, for those who don't know, is a design interface language from Google for web apps, for what it prescribes for web apps, for obviously Android apps, etc. And provides, it's sort of a stylistic guide similar to what you saw with Metro. Like Metro apps should be left, right. They should have, this sort of element, that sort of element. They should be square. They should be. So in that same sense, material design does provide similar aspects to that. It has principles. It has like be flat, be meaningful, etc. Like very sort of interesting concepts, and they talk about how they, different components and how they interact and things like that. So you have this concept order called cards, and cards are like these self-contained sort of elements that you can use, and how they might look in context of, say, a mobile app, or how they might look in the context of a web app, things like that. So these are sort of the design elements that you'll see them. There's been a number of interesting articles that have been written on blog sites like Medium, where they talk about implementation. There was an implementation blog post on, not on here, but they talk about certain like how these things interact and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. We support it as part of KendaUI. So for those of you targeting KendaUI, we support it as a theme, which is great. So definitely check that out. I think this was on Y Combinator. Just trying. Sorry, I'm trying to find the quick link here. Sorry, I can't find it. This is CSS framework for a set of React components that implement Google's material design. There you go. So it's like nuts and gum. Yeah, so React and material design. No, it's all good. So yeah, definitely a lot of interesting work being done here. There are some other interesting projects that I'll just mention here, like Aurelia is one. This is utilizing ES6 web components, which I showed you, object.observe, which is for change tracking, and other things, and into a JavaScript framework that looks and feels like a little bit like Angular. This was announced just last week, I believe, and they give some motivations for this. You can go ahead and look at the docs if you want, in terms of how it works and how it hangs together. So yeah, different ways of actually targeting a framework. Lots of different things worth checking out. But yeah, just try to keep on top of this stuff if you can. So.
How do you keep track of everything that is coming?
I read the opinions of others. I take a look at kind of what people are saying. I poke things a lot, and I see if they work well. I don't tend to bet the farm on them early, that's for sure. But I do keep abreast of what's going on with them. And I usually try and wait for a good example to hit the web or online app stores before I start taking a serious look at it myself. So it's kind of like, you know, why don't be a hero. Let the others take the beach. You hang back, wait for everyone to get you know, slaughtered, and then once the beach has been taken, then you march up and hey, all right, high-fiving each other, you know, like. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's just one of those things where yeah, I certainly don't prescribe taking bets early on technology just for the sake of it. But I think keeping an eye on it is good. So, and the internet's great for that because it's just a lot of people discussing things. So I'll track Hacker News or Reddit or blogs or Twitter, and I'll just see, is there any momentum being built around it. So I mean, Angular was like that. Angular with the Alpha Geeks, it had that sort of acceptance bubble sort of going, and then took off the Alpha Geeks, and then started becoming mainstream, and then once organizations started adopting it and the Microsoft ecosystem started adopting it, then it started to just totally ramp up. And now these days, the old joke now is like, as soon as something is announced on LinkedIn, you'll see jokes like, yeah, I'm looking for, you know, like for example, iOS or the Apple Watch came out and people were putting jokes on Twitter like, I'm looking for a developer with 5 years of Apple Watch development experience, you know. So yeah, it's impossible to stay current on everything, but you can definitely keep track of these things from afar. It doesn't matter where you live, you can do it. So yeah, lots of other tools to check out. But
Have you got any particular people you recommend to follow?
the question is, do I have any particular people that you'd recommend following? It really depends on what you're trying to track. There's so many different areas of tracking. Like there's guys on the Google developers developer relations team that do a really good job. There's obviously the folks on the web teams for Microsoft that do a good job. It really depends on what you're trying. There's security guys, there's ASP.NET guys, there's the tool guys, there's the node guys. Like it just kind of find the people you think are kind of like the authority figures on certain topics. Find the topics you obviously care about, and then kind of track those people. I really can't prescribe anyone in general who would be worth following because of what they have to say. The other thing you have to remember is that it's just a total echo chamber in terms of that stuff. I mean, I follow some guys because I hope I can glean a gem off them, but sometimes they're talking about, oh, look what I made with my 3D printer. I'm like, all right. So that's no web dev experience being shared there, but that's all right. So yeah, yeah, I would just try to aggregate, you know, those things that you can. So yeah, but share it when you find something, share it out. That's kind of helps as well. So thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate your time today, and that wraps up our last session here. And yeah, I'll just share with you some contact details if you need to reach me. Oh, sorry. This is me. This is my email address. That's me on Twitter. This is my blog, although I haven't written on it for quite a while. I apologize. Yeah, you can find me other places. Just Google my name, so I'll be good enough. Thanks a lot.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.